a man named Nader hires a woman named Razia to take care of his sick father. One day after work, he returns to meet his dad nearly dead on the floor, with Razia nowhere to be found. When she returns, Nader pushes her out of his house until she falls down the stairs, but he's unaware that she's actually pregnant. A few days earlier, a woman named Simon files for divorce after her husband Nader refuses to come with her on a trip abroad. While in front of a judge, Nader claims he can't leave his father alone because he has Alzheimer's. But Seaman can't seem to understand this because he can always hire someone to look after her father-in-law. As Nader insists that he's going nowhere, Seaman asks if she can take their daughter on the trip. However, Nader says it's not up to him because their daughter Terma has chosen to stay with him. As Seaman keeps complaining that he's influencing their child, the judge dismisses them because there are no solid grounds for divorce. After they leave, Seaman follows Nader home. But as they arrive, she starts packing her things while he attends to Razi, who is at the house to interview for the job of taking care of his dad while he's at work. While Nader tells Razier about all the work she has to do, Terme tries to convince her mom to stay, but her mind seems already made up. After a while, Nader tells Razier that she can resume the next day if she agrees to his terms. Shortly after, Razier leaves the house with her daughter Somaye, and not long after, Seaman also heads out, with Nader looking sad to see her leave. On the way to her mom's house, Seaman sees Razia and Somaye, so she offers to give them a lift to the train station. When they enter the car, Seaman says that even though she won't be around for a while, Razier doesn't have to be bothered about anything because Nader can be trusted. She then tells Razier that when she makes her decision, she should inform her sister-in-law, who connected her to the job. The next day, Razier agrees to take the job, so she arrives for her first day at work. While she's then busy working, Razier notices that her unborn baby is moving around, so she tells Somaye to come and feel it too. As Somaye looks excited as she feels her unborn sibling moving, she and Razier see Nader's dad leaving his room. Razier asks what he wants, and he says he wants to get a newspaper. She then tells him that the paper is inside his room, but as she follows him there, she sees that he has soiled the bed. Razier immediately calls Seaman to see if she can come over, but she says she's still busy at work. Following this, Razier takes the old man to the bathroom so he can clean himself. However, as he doesn't do anything, she calls someone to ask if it's religiously okay for her to clean for him. She eventually learns that she can do it, so she helps the old man. Later that day, when Nader arrives home with Terme, he sees that his daughter's teacher, Mrs. Gahrai, is already around for a private lesson. After a while, Razier tells Nader that she can't continue the job because it's a lot of work. She also says she's really tired, but Nader looks disappointed because their agreement was for her to come every day. While he walks to the kitchen to do something, Mrs. Gahrai tells Razier that she might just be tired because it's her first day. As Razier then prepares to leave, she asks Mrs. Gahrai to give her the number of a gynecologist she can recommend. After the teacher writes the number, Razier thanks her and mentions that the baby has been moving a lot lately. Somaye then jokes that the baby wants to come out and play with her. Shortly after, Razier goes to tell Nader that he has to look for male helpers for his dad. Nader says he can't just let anyone near his dad, but Razier then mentions that she had to clean his dad earlier in the day. Nader looks shocked and says it's the first time his dad will do that. As he then pays Razier, she leaves with Somaya. However, she returns and tells Nader that she thinks her husband will be fit for the job. Nader tells her to inform him about the job, but she says he'll have to arrange a meeting by himself because she doesn't want her husband to know the kind of work she has been doing. Nader agrees. And the next day, while he's at work, Razier's husband, Hojat, comes over to see him. After speaking for a while, he agrees to the terms and says he'll treat Nader's father well. The next day, when he's supposed to resume work, Hojat doesn't show up, but Razier arrives to stand in for him. She then tells Nader that her husband couldn't come because one of his creditors took him to the police station. Later that day, while Razier is cleaning the spilled garbage on the stairs, Somaye comes over to inform her that Nader's dad is not inside the house anymore. This leaves her shocked, and as she realizes that the door is open, she starts looking for him outside. She eventually sees him near a newspaper stand, but she then has to look for how to quickly cross the busy road before the old man jumps in front of cars. Much later, when Nader returns from work, he plays with Somaya and Terme, while Razier looks overwhelmed in the kitchen. The next day, Razier arrives for work as usual and starts taking care of the old man. After Nader closes from work, he arrives home with Terme. only to see his dad on the floor with his hands tied to his oxygen tank. Nader immediately tries to revive his dad while Terme starts crying because she thinks he's already dead. However, Nader eventually manages to wake his dad. He then gets really angry because Razier is nowhere to be found. When she returns, he confronts her for tying his dad and leaving him to die, but Razier says she had to go somewhere. Nader doesn't seem to care, and he also accuses her of stealing money from his room. Razier looks hurt and says she knows nothing about the money, but Nader doesn't believe her. He chases her out of his house, but she eventually enters again. This angers Nader, and as she refuses to leave, he pushes her and locks the door before returning to meet his dad. Terme sees this and opens the door only to see Razier sitting on the stairs before leaving while a neighbor watches her. The next day, Nader takes Terme to stay with Seaman for the day. Before he leaves, Terme returns to tell him that Seaman wants to see him. As he then enters, Seaman asks if he fought Razier. Nader says he didn't do anything to her, but Seaman tells him that Razier's sister-in-law just called to say that Razier is in the hospital. Nader looks quite concerned, so he tells Seaman that they have to go and see her. When they get to the hospital, they learn that Razier is in surgery because she just had a miscarriage. Nader and Seaman can't believe this, but as they're told that Razier's family is around, they decide to check for them. When they reach the lobby, they see Hojat and approach him to ask about Razier. He looks shocked to see Nader and asks how he knows his wife. As he then learns that his wife was working for Nader, Hojat gets really angry because Nader's presence means his wife didn't just fall as he was told. Following this, Hojat tries to beat him up, but a few people hold him back. While Seaman also tries to separate them, she gets hurt in the process, and Hojat is kicked out of the hospital. The next day, Nader is invited to the police station to defend himself against Hojat and Razier. When they're in front of an interrogator, Hojat accuses Nader of killing his unborn baby. However, Nader says he didn't know Razier was pregnant. Razier then says he's lying because she talked about pregnancy in front of him and his daughter's teacher. Nader says he can't remember hearing anything, but the interrogator tells him to invite Mrs. Karai for questioning. He also says that if he finds out that Nader knew Razier was pregnant, he could be charged with murder because the baby was already 19 weeks old. Nader can't believe this, and as he tries to make a case for himself, Razier says the main reason she's angry at him is because he called her a thief. As the interrogator asks if he called her a thief, Nader says he was only angry because she left his dad tied to his oxygen tank while she went out. Nader also mentions that his dad got hurt after that. He eventually says he wants to file a case against her, so the interrogator tells him to get a medical examiner to check his dad to confirm that he was really hurt. Shortly after, Nader is told that he'd be allowed to leave only if he pays his bail. Nader looks shocked, but the interrogator says it's because he's being charged with murder. He then begs the interrogator to let him go because he needs to get to his dad and daughter, but the man ignores him. Elsewhere, Simin is taking care of Nader's dad when Terme comes in and says that if her mom had stayed, her dad wouldn't be in jail. Simin says she's not at fault for what happened and that Nader probably got upset by her leaving. The next day, while in custody, Nader sees Terme and asks why she came. She then says she's with Simin and her grandmother, who have come to pay his bail. Shortly after, Mrs. Karai shows up at the police station and gets asked how she knew Razier was pregnant. She then says that she saw Somaye's drawing in which she made Razier look fat. She also mentions that it was after Somaye told her that she also asked Razier about it. Since she also says she couldn't have guessed that Razier was pregnant, the interrogator concludes that there was no way Nader could have also known she was pregnant. After the teacher leaves, Hojat insists that Nader might have bought her to support him. He also continues to blame Nader for pushing Razia. The interrogator then asks if anyone else saw when she fell, and Razier says there was a neighbor there. Following this, the interrogator says the neighbor must be questioned. After a while, the interrogator also tells Razier to get ready to answer for the case Nader filed regarding what she did to his father. Because this means she could be jailed, Hojat lashes out at the interrogator, who then instructs one of his men to take him to a cell. After he leaves, Razier follows him and sees that he's looking uncomfortable. As she asks what's wrong, he says he's not feeling well, so she goes to beg the interrogator to free her husband because he's not feeling well. She says he's been going in and out of prison quite recently because of the money he owes his creditors. As she also shows the drugs he has been using, Nader begs the interrogator to accept her request, so he finally agrees to free her husband. A while later, Nader is free to leave, but before he heads out with Terme, she begs him to take Simin back, and he promises to do that. On the way to Simon's mother's house, Terme asks if her dad truly didn't know that Razier was pregnant. He says he didn't know, but Terme doesn't believe this. Nader then asks why she thinks he knew, and she says it's because Simon mentioned that he wasn't surprised to hear of Razier's miscarriage, even though he claimed to be unaware of her pregnancy status. Nader says it didn't mean anything, and that Simon is just trying to turn her against him. When they get to Simon's family house, Nader takes his dad and returns to the car. As Terme then looks at him, he says he couldn't just bring himself to beg Simon. When they get home, Nader goes to see their neighbor, but this seems to leave Terme confused as she doesn't understand why her dad would see the woman before she's interrogated. Following this, Nader tells Terme to follow him. Just then, he shows her that there's no way his push would have made Razi fall down the stairs because the stairs are not in the direction she was pushed. Terme finally believes her dad, so he calls the police to his house to explain it to them. With Hojat and Razier also present, the policemen eventually discover that Nader couldn't have pushed Razier to fall down the stairs. As the neighbor also confirms that she saw Razier sitting on the stairs, Nader says it's unlikely that he pushed her that far. This gets Hojat angry, and as he tries to attack Nader for switching the narrative, he is stopped by the policeman. When Somaya then goes to pick her book inside Nader's house, she tells him her mom didn't steal from him. Nader says he knows, and that he's only angry with the way she left his father. As he then gives her the book, Somaya says they left his dad because Razier had to go to the hospital. The following day, Nader takes his dad for a medical evaluation to assess the wounds he sustained after Razier left him. Before he does evaluation, Nader eventually decides against it because he doesn't want to put his dad through any additional stress. Elsewhere, Hojat goes to Terme's school to confront Mrs. Gari because he believes she lied to the interrogator. Terme feels embarrassed, and Simon also arrives after being called about what's happening. Even though the school officials try to get Hojat to leave, he says he won't do that until Mrs. Garai swears that Nader didn't know Razier was pregnant. She does just this, and Hojat leaves. Later that day, when Terme and Semin return home, they see Nader calling Mrs. Garai to ask about the number of the gynecologist she gave Razier the other day. Just then, Semin complains that he needs to stop fighting Razier because Hojat just embarrassed their daughter at school. Nader looks shocked, but he says he just wants to clear his name. Semin tells him to pay a settlement so the case can end, but he says he can't. She then says he'll be putting their daughter's life at risk, but Nader says Hojat can't do anything to Terme. As Semin finally asks if she can at least take Terme with her, Nader says he can't believe that his wife is putting him under a lot of pressure just to get their daughter. They then have a serious argument, after which Nader tells Terme that she's free to leave if she wants. However, as Razier asks Terme if she wants to stay, she says she will. Later that day, while Nader is studying with his daughter, she asks if he really didn't know Razier was pregnant. He says he didn't, but she then asks how he knew about the gynecologist. Seeing as there's nothing else to say, Nader says he knew she was pregnant, but that in the moment he pushed her, he had already forgotten because he was very angry. Terme then asks why he didn't tell the police, and he says he would have been sent to jail. However, he mentions that if she wants him to report himself, he'll do just that. The next day, Nader picks up Terme from school, and as he sees Mrs. Garai, he tries to stop her so they can talk, but she refuses to stop. After a while, Nader goes to the police station to report that he's scared Hojat might do something to his daughter. The interrogator then tells him that Mrs. Garai has taken back her statement because she believes he knew Razier was pregnant. Nader says he didn't know, but the interrogator asks how he knew the women talked about the gynecologist's number. Nader says his daughter told him, so the interrogator tells him to bring Terme inside the office. Nader looks shocked because Terme didn't actually tell him anything, but he still takes her to the interrogator. As she gets asked if she told her dad about the gynecologist Mrs. Garai suggested, she lies that she told him. On the way home, she then cries in the car as she can't believe she had to lie to help her dad. Elsewhere, Simin goes to beg Hojat to take a settlement. Even though he initially refuses, he eventually agrees to accept the payment. After a while, Simin goes to the house to speak to Nader to pay Hojat, but he says he won't pay anything because it would make him look guilty. Simin can't believe this, and she says he needs to realize that the case is affecting Terme. Despite this, Nader stands his ground, so Simin tells Terme that they have to leave. After shouting at her daughter, Terme takes her bag and prepares to leave. Nader then tells her that going to her grandmother's place will be good for her so she can prepare well for her exams. However, Terme cries as she asks why her dad can't pay Hojat so that Seaman can come back home. Nader says it has nothing to do with that, but Terme says she knows her mom is ready to return because her luggage is in the car. Nader says nothing, but as she's about to leave, he tells her that if she thinks he's guilty, she can tell Simon to come back so they can pay Hojat. However, when Terme goes down to meet Simon, she says nothing to her mom. The next day, Razieh meets with Seaman to tell her that she's scared something might happen to Sumaye if she doesn't tell the truth. She then confesses that the day before Nader pushed her, she got hit by a car while she was trying to cross the road to help his dad after he left the house. She also says that the reason she left the old man at home the next day is because she went to the hospital. Simon then realizes that Razieh might have lost the baby before Nader pushed her. Razieh also says she was prompted to speak up because she thinks something bad will happen to her daughter if she and her husband take any settlement money. Simon then says she agreed to the settlement mainly because she's scared of Hojat hurting Terme. As she asks if Hojat will leave them alone without the settlement, Razieh doesn't know what to say. The next day, Seaman and Nader go to Hojat's house to finalize the settlement. Before he signs the agreement, Nader says he wants Razieh and Terme to be in the room. When they arrive, Nader tells Razieh that he'll sign the check if she agrees to swear that he caused her miscarriage. Just then, Razieh goes to the kitchen, and as she takes a while there, her sister-in-law begs her to go out to swear so that Hojat won't get embarrassed in front of his creditors, who are also around. She refuses to do this, and as Hojat comes over, she tells him that she has doubts. She then tells him about how a car hit her and left her in a lot of pain. Hojat can't believe this, but he still tells his wife to come out to swear. He even says he'll take it as his sin, but Razieh says she can't swear on anything because it could affect their daughter. This causes Hojat to lose his cool, and he then angrily slaps himself. Shortly after, he leaves the house, and while the guests are wondering what's happening, Razieh blames Seaman for still letting Nader bring the settlement option to her husband. Following this, Nader leaves with Seaman and Terme, only to see that his car's windshield has been damaged by Hojat. Even though they're shocked, they still enter the car, but no one says anything. The next day, Nader and Seaman go to a judge to finalize their divorce. After a while, Terme is called in to choose the parent she'll be staying with. Even though she says she has decided, she can't help but cry as she tells the judge that she'd like her parents to stay outside before she says anything. After this, Nader and Seaman step outside to wait for Terme's final decision.